Brandon Miller, like I mentioned, currently my second ranked player ahead of Scoot Henderson. He is a 6'9" wing with exceptional size, and I just think that's where the value is in the NBA right now. 6'9" wings. His defense, the most underrated in the draft, in my opinion. I think he's an excellent defender, and pair that with fantastic 3-point shot making, and I think he's got some really exciting playmaking talent. You're talking about a guy who can shoot, a guy who can pass, and a guy who can defend, all to I think an excellent level. That for me at 6'9" is someone who I want to invest in. He's just a modern star for me. Like, he has the issue of rim finishing, which I've no doubt you're going to mention. But he has improved on that as the year has gone on. And he's so versatile and can help in so many other ways. Even if that's never a massive strength, I think that can still be something that like he can work around. And again, I think it will be less exposed in the NBA. In high school, he was known as like a mid-range go-to scorer, which isn't really something we saw at Alabama, but that's more down to the system where it was like a lot of threes. And like we didn't see that ISO game in the mid-range as much, but it is something that is definitely there. So if you're worried about his like go-to scoring ability, I wouldn't worry too much. I think it's definitely something to tap into. Now, you could add this as a negative, but he played under scrutiny all year because of the off-the-court issues. And for the big game where everyone was saying he should be suspended, he went for 41 points against Gigi Jackson, which
on
the crowd
road, in a hostile environment.
Oh, yeah. Probably the most hostile environment any single player played in this year, and freaking owned it, which I can understand. You say, well, like the off-court stuff is a concern. I get that. But if you park that, you're talking about someone who's got serious mental strength to battle through that, which I think when you get into high-stakes playoff situations, you've got someone there who's played in hostile environments and he's come good. I think he fits next to LaMelo perfectly. The Hornets were a terrible offense this year, a terrible three-point shooting team. He definitely helps with that. And like, I think you can also use LaMelo off ball a little bit with him because I think he really has some upside as a playmaker. So overall, I absolutely love Brandon Miller. I have him as like a kind of a Brandon Ingram, but with early Paul George defense as my like best outcome. So like, I mean, if you think, I don't know, I'm putting that as a Paul George, Brandon Ingram hybrid player who I think could be massively impactful on both ends and can carry teams offensively as well.
So, and I don't mean to come at this from too negative of a side. I feel like similar to how you must have felt when you had to argue against Scoot and Wemby, because I do think Brandon Miller is going to be a good NBA player. I would absolutely draft him. We'd love to have him in a Hornets uniform. He's still top 5 on my big board. But for these purposes, I do have like pretty significant concerns about, like you said, his ability to separate from defenders, create space as a ball handler, to get his shots off the dribble. And I don't necessarily think that that's going to get better in the NBA, even though obviously the spacing will help him a lot. And you're not really allowed to play defense in the NBA quite as much anymore as you are in college. But the reason I say that is, for one, improving your separation ability and your like athleticism in that facet is like pretty difficult. Anybody can like get stronger or lose weight, or, work on their core and get a stronger lower body and stuff so they can hold their ground a little better. But like that type of like burst and explosiveness, like to create space and, be able to push off and allow yourself some room to shoot, is really hard to like improve on as you get older. And I'm not really sure that would necessarily like help him either, because he's also, I feel like he uses that like kind of lack of explosiveness necessarily, and that like to just shoot over players. Like that's why his touch is so beneficial, and that's kind of how it's gotten to the point that it is. Like when he, like you said, he actually is a pretty good mid-range scorer. Like he's not like an ISO mid-range scorer, but if he can catch the ball, like any shot that he would get off the catch in the mid-range or anything like that, or just like off of 1 or 2 dribbles, he's a very good shooter. He can shoot from literally any spot on the court. But in the NBA, players that are like just shooters and don't necessarily get to the rim as well, or aren't necessarily able to be like number one option creators. And in top 50 quality games this year, this is per Bart Torvik's stats page, he only shot 38.5% from inside the arc. So against any team that is top 50 rated in the Bart Torvik system, he was a significantly below 40% finisher inside the arc. And in conference games, he actually shot 62%. So he did finish the year a little stronger than he started. But the higher the competition level, the more he struggled. And I'm not even, you have to rule March Madness out of it because he had a groin injury during that. During the tournament that obviously would have hampered any sort of ability to, move around and create space and stuff like that, which he already struggles with anyway. But even throughout the year, like against high level competition, like those weren't necessarily like all of his best games. Like he played, by his standards anyway, he played like fairly poorly against UConn in November. It was like their 5th or 6th game of the season, I think. He had a pretty bad game against Tennessee as well. Like obviously the tournament game against San Diego State was a bad game too. But like I said, that one was a little bit more so excusable than the other ones. But I just think anytime he really gets up against like NBA level talent, it kind of shows itself more so than it does anyway, which it's just quite a red flag for me when a player that is that big isn't like as fluid or like twitchy and athletic and just like powerful overall as like wing scorers like Jason Tatum or Paul George or some of the guys that he gets compared to. I think in my eyes, he's much closer to like someone like Chris Middleton, but with like a little bit more size, which is more of an all-star player than an all NBA player. Like, and that's where for me, he goes from like the 2 or 3 range to like 4, 5, or 6.